Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, October 10th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the Virginia governor's race after last night's arguably abysmal campaign performance for Winsome Sears, the lieutenant governor of Virginia and the Republican nominee in this year's November 4th election. With roughly 3 weeks to go, last night's debate only reaffirmed many of the suspicions that voters had had about the Republican ticket in the state of Virginia when Winsome Sears went toe-to-toe with Abigail Spanberger on the debate stage, to which Spanberger had called out Winsome Sears' past of being against gay marriage and protections for LGBT citizens across Virginia, across the Commonwealth, and to which she had responded that if someone was to fire their employee for being gay, that was not categorically discrimination. Now, it was probably one of the more extreme mess-ups that we've seen on the debate stage, but also just generally throughout this campaign season in the state of Virginia in specific, at least when it comes down to the gubernatorial election. Winsome Sears in this race has never really been the favorite, but certainly stood to be in a more competitive position earlier on in the race, to which we have now started to see a complete and utter decline of her chances at winning across the state. And arguably, it makes a lot of sense. The data right before this election wasn't great for Winsome Sears, and it doesn't continue to get any better at all. The only data points that even suggest this race might be more competitive is the most recent Signal poll that shows Abigail Spanberger with a 4-point lead across the state. But ultimately, anything's an improvement off the 2021 election when Democrats lost to now Governor Glenn Youngkin in the state of Virginia, who is term limited and cannot run for re-election. Now, Abigail Spanberger, I think last night on the debate stage, really saw a tremendous boost in her vote share that she will likely see this coming November. It was the only Virginia gubernatorial debate that we have seen these two go toe-to-toe with each other, and it comes just weeks before the election, where there was an opportunity presented that could have given Winsome Sears maybe the rebound that she needed in this race. It was always going to be tough, but we remember that back in 2021, it was around this time that right after the debate, that was just weeks before the election, it was Glenn Youngkin who won over the hearts and minds of voters in Virginia in that final stretch. Terry McAuliffe had led in Virginia for months on end throughout the beginning to the end of the campaign season up until around this point in October, when all of the data switched and Glenn Youngkin started to lead. But we aren't seeing that happen with Winsome Sears, and it is because of the things she says and the things that she does. But I'm actually not quite surprised about what we saw last night, given her shaky relationship with her lieutenant governor nominee, John Reed, who is the first openly gay nominee for lieutenant governor, or any of the three positions that are up for election this coming November in Virginia, in the Commonwealth's history. And so for that, what we know is that Winsome Sears and John Reed do not get along. Winsome Sears has in the past been very public that she did not agree with the ruling of Obergefell v. Hodges that gay marriage was a protected right enshrined in the Constitution. She was not on the side of the justices who declared that gay marriage must be legalized nationwide, and that makes things difficult, to say the least, when your lieutenant governor nominee is a gay man running for office in the state. And also not to mention, too, that when you think about the fact that John Reed was initially being pushed out of the race by Glenn Youngkin supposedly called him back in April and said, you need to get out of the race because otherwise we are going to lose the election for lieutenant governor because you have scandals and, not to mention, identity politics, I do think certainly played a part of it, but I also think simultaneously, John Reed was not a great candidate for lieutenant governor in the same way that Winsome Sears was not. The only way that he was going to win was with Winsome Sears dragging him across the finish line, and Glenn Youngkin knew that Winsome Sears did not have what it takes to win the election, so he was hoping that some of these down-ballot races with Jason Miyares or the lieutenant governor's race could have gone to the Republican Party in the event the governorship collapses here. But now we are starting to see it happen on the lieutenant governor's side and the governor's side. But the focus of this video is on Winsome Sears. And I say this all to point out that I'm not really that surprised that Winsome Sears on the debate stage last night, I implore you to watch the clip too, because I think a lot of people on the right have tried to spin this and say that this is just a misquote of her words. It is clear as day what she is saying here, doubles down. Not only did she say it once, she doubled down on it and then proceeded to defend it. I mean, these are not the things that you find to be in candidates who know how to walk that fine line and win in states that may not otherwise be willing to vote for Republicans, but might be on the gubernatorial level. And it's a stark contrast from what we saw 4 years ago. We covered the Virginia governor's race in 2021. We made countless videos about it. I live streamed it on election night. You can still find it up there, where Glenn Youngkin won in Virginia. But in that final stage, we were very clear on the channel, and I'm sure, everyone else was too, because they were reading the writing on the wall, the same writing we were reading, that showed that Glenn Youngkin was on a pathway to victory. But it wasn't because he was all of a sudden, he was a great candidate for Virginia at the time. That's why he won. But thinking about what Terry McAuliffe had done in a similar way on the debate stage, said a very, very negative thing, that parents should not dictate what is being taught in the public schools. And whether or not you agree with the premise or the argument, it doesn't matter. The way it came across to the Northern Virginia community, to every other part of the Commonwealth, you found that voters really, really soured on that comment, and it was a big thing. Critical race theory was in conversation. Can you believe that? It's not a thing anymore, but at the time, it was all anyone could talk about. And it was Glenn Youngkin who seemed to have perfectly capitalized on that moment, and did so to a point that he won across the state by 1.9% when Joe Biden won the state by 10.1 just a year prior. A massive, massive change. But it only worked because Glenn Youngkin, as a Republican in a blue state, knew how to walk the fine line. While we've seen Winsome Sears beg and plead with the President of the United States to come down to Virginia and campaign alongside her, to which we've seen the Trump world largely opposed to doing so because she had come out in a very big way, not endorsed, but defended to the highest degree Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida in the 2024 primaries before reading the writing on the wall and endorsing Trump just months before the election. But the Trump world knows that. Donald Trump himself remembers that. And there's a reason why he hasn't given his full-fledged endorsement despite just weeks before the election. But moving that point aside, what did to the benefit of Glenn Youngkin in 2021 was that he wasn't seeking the Trump endorsement. If anything, he was actively rejecting it. It's one thing when Winsome Sears can't get it. You might think, okay, isn't this the same effect? Absolutely not. When Winsome Sears goes to the press and says, I want the president down here, I agree with what the president is doing. When she's asked on an interview that has now been broadcast all across the state because Abigail Spanberger is outspending her 10-1, you're going to find that the moments where she's asked, what policies would you defer with on the President of the United States? They don't have any because she doesn't disagree with him. But the problem is that Virginia is not a red state. Kamala Harris, despite losing the presidential election, won Virginia. And despite having less electoral votes than Hillary Clinton in 2016, Kamala Harris still outperformed the Hillary Clinton margin in Virginia, despite Virginia being the state that Hillary Clinton's running mate was from in 2016. And so when you think about how blue this state has actually gotten, Glenn Youngkin was an anomaly. It was a fluke and not the norm. And that is the problem with the comments here that she is saying, that Winsome Sears is saying on the debate stage that is being broadcast today, tomorrow, and for the rest of the campaign all across the state. And just thinking, the one thing that I think that everyone has come to recognize, similar to that of abortion, as if the Supreme Court decides to do X, Y, and Z with the rights that have been afforded to Americans in the past few decades and potentially even in the past decade. Abortion was one of them that really turned around the 22 midterms in favor of the Democratic Party and really had a major reckoning point across this country where voters were asking themselves what type of future do they want to see in terms of abortion access in left, right, middle states, thinking about it, red, blue, purple is what I meant to say, thinking about issues like that. It is very hard to get the country unified, especially when the Supreme Court finds themselves agreeing with it. Very hard to find that the majority of Americans will be unified on anything. But on the things they are most unified on, abortion rights and LGBT equality. And the support for gay marriage across the country reaches low points in states like Arkansas, where just 49% of residents favor allowing same-sex couples to marry legally. But in a state like Virginia, well, if Arkansas is at 49%, Virginia is at a whopping 71%, on par with a lot of other blue states because it is one. And so to think that Winsome Sears could make such an egregious mistake on the debate stage, I think is really what just encapsulates perfectly as to why her campaign was doomed from the beginning. Because even with the best campaign manager and the best campaign team and all the money in the world, it is her, Winsome Sears, who is the problem. And voters saw it on full display. Any hopes and idea that this governor election might be the one that could turn it around, if anything, it only piles on. The snowball effect had already been rolling from the top of the hill for days now, weeks now, months even, given the data that we've seen in Virginia. And it is only going to get worse as people start to become more and more aware of what we are seeing in this state. And it is moments like these that really expose just how bad the Virginia's top recruit was in this state. Because Republicans, believe it or not, canceled their GOP primary for her. They said, we're not going to have one because she's clearly our best candidate. Well, is she? There is a conversation, I'm sure, being had that in the event that Jason Miyares wins the Attorney General's race, is he the next successor running for governor, even if John Reed somehow wins the lieutenant governor's race, which I can tell you now just simply isn't going to happen. But even exploring that possibility, it is Winsome Sears who the GOP has already written off, and they know that's done. They're not going to win there. Abigail Spanberger is guaranteed to be the next governor across the state. No doubt in my mind, at least at this point, that that is going to happen. And I don't think that the Republicans think that it's going to happen either. I don't think the Democrats think that the governor's race is at all competitive either, right? They're focusing on New Jersey. They're focusing on the Attorney General's race, the lieutenant governor's race, for good reason. But they know this one's going to be solid. And I think that when you find that Republicans will do a lot of reflection, I think, after this cycle to think, okay, where did they go wrong? In the same way Democrats did in 2021. They didn't have a canceled primary for Terry McAuliffe, but it was pretty much that. It was not a competitive race. Every major name came out and endorsed Terry McAuliffe, and it became a question. How did someone like Terry McAuliffe, who in 2013, in an Obama midterm, was able to outperform the expectations and win across Virginia in 2013, that couldn't make it over in 2021. Virginia, which had been a state that, yes, Obama won in 2012, but he only won it by 3.9%. A year later, it was Terry McAuliffe winning by a similar amount. To think that Virginia has gotten bluer, but Terry McAuliffe lost in 2021 was probably a big shock to the Democratic Party, but I don't think that this time around it will be a shock to the Republicans. But I do think there will be points of reflection. Because oftentimes I think they believe that just because some candidate got over one hurdle, it means they are destined to get over the next. I'm reminded, very much so, of the elections in North Carolina in 2024. And I'm not talking about the presidential level. I'm talking about the governor's race, where Republicans all but canceled their primary on the GOP side to nominate Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, who had won his election against a Democrat in 2020, but 4 years later would go on to lose the governorship by 15 points in a state that Donald Trump won by nearly 4. Thinking about that, a 19-point delta between Trump's margin and the Democrats' margin in the state really shows you everything. And it shows you just how weak Mark Robinson was. And you have to ask, why did Republicans put him there in the first place? But it's because, again, this idea that if you cross a much lower hurdle in an election that nobody's paying attention to, where nobody's vetting this candidate because they're not the person at the top, versus now it's happening, they tend to nominate those candidates only for them to go on to lose, in some cases, by resounding margins. And in Virginia, we could very well likely see that to be the case. So, what is the impact of last night's debate? Well, it doesn't change anything in terms of direction as to how the state is going to go. It just only further helps the Democratic Party in a state where, arguably, what they're doing right now is that already Abigail Spanberger is slamming Winsome Sears for her comments on abortion. Now it's going to be on gay marriage. And I imagine that it will only continue to decrease the amount of support that the Republican ticket receives at large, in that in the state of Virginia, Winsome Sears was not going to win the governorship yesterday. She's not going to win it today, and that's just the way that it is. This debate that might have been able to rebound her to even resemble a competitive race just simply isn't going to happen, because she oftentimes really is the reason that she is the weakest candidate. It's not her team. It's not those around her. Ultimately, it is Winsome Earl Sears. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server if you go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2025 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.